Students are not listening to me, apparently. Prashant, are
Sir,
you teaching online or you're teaching offline now?
offline, sir. I'm teaching offline now.
Okay, at least
Sir.
then you can see your students.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All of them or most of them are students, sir. So, may I now request our vice principal, sir, to give me permission to start the program?
Okay.
Okay.
You can start.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Good evening, everyone, and good afternoon to our friends from Ukraine. I am Prashant Kumar Sharma, an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science, Bidhan Chandra College, University of Calcutta. I, on behalf of the Department of Political Science, Bidhan Chandra College, warmly welcome you all to this international webinar entitled Contemporary Challenges to World Security. This webinar has been organized by the Department of Political Science in association with Internal Quality Assurance Cell (IQAC) of our institution. We have got Professor Swaran Singh, sir, professor at the Center for International Politics Organization and Disarmament, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He is also the president of the Association of Asia Scholars. So thank you very much for being with us. We have Professor Anatolia Kruglasov, sir, head at the Department of Political Science and Public Administration, Yuri Fedkovich, Chernivtsi National University, Ukraine. Sir, thank you very much for being with us. We are honored with your presence. And we have Dr. Natalia Nechaeva Yurichuk as professor at the Department of Political Science and Public Administration, Yuri Fedkovich, Chernivtsi National University. Thank you very much, Dr. Natalia, for being with us. May I now invite our head of the institution, Dr. Ramesh Kar, Vice Principal, sir, to kindly deliver a formal welcome address. Sir, it's over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Respected research person, honorable dignitaries, dear colleague, research scholars, conveners, and affectionate students. It is really a great pleasure and privilege to be present in the international webinars organized by the Department of Political Science in collaboration with IQAC Bidhan Chandra College, Risla. Being the head of the institute, I must congratulate the students and teachers of the Department of Political Science, especially Professor Prashant Kumar Sharma and HOD Professor Devdas Day, as they have taken initiative to organize the international webinar. First of all, I, on behalf of Institute, must welcome the respected research person, Professor Swaran Singh, Center for International Politics, JNU, New Delhi, and Professor Anatoly Kruglasov, Department of Political Science and Public Administration, National University, Ukraine, and Dr. Natalia Nechaeva a professor, Department of Political Science and Public Administration, Ukraine. I would be immensely grateful as they have all responded to our invitation despite their busy schedule. I do hope that our participant would reap a sound harvest from the day's discussion. I firmly believe that the day's discussion will be interesting and interactive one. The survey of the day's speech and reciprocal discussion, I do hope would further illumine the minds of the teachers and taught. I wish a warm success of the day's webinar. Once again, thanking you all.
Thank you very much, sir, for delivering the formal welcome address. May I now request Professor Swaran Singh, sir, to kindly chair the session. Sir, now it's over to you.
Thank you, Prashant, and thank you, Dr. Ramesh Kar, and I'm happy to see Dr. Praveer Kanti is also with us, and many other students are with us. I had the delight of being on the same platform earlier when Natalia and Anatoly both were there, but then I was one of the speakers. Today I have the privilege to be the timekeeper. So I will be basically saying few things maybe in the end, but primarily looking forward to listening to two very eminent experts from the field which we are discussing, from the ground, as if with everyday understanding of the situation as they see it from Ukraine. But as Prashant just mentioned, Dr. Natalia is currently professor in the Department of Political Science and Public Administration in the Faculty of History, Political Science and International Relations. During this period of crisis that we are all discussing, but even before that, during the pandemic, she held important responsibilities in managing distance education, online education, and she's been teaching courses like political journalism, crisis management, ethnopolitical studies, etc. She's also been beneficiary of the very prestigious Erasmus program and has been visiting scholar in Greece and Austria. And of course, Natalia has also attended several other conferences and seminars in several countries in Austria, Belgium, Croatia, Germany, Moldova, Romania, Slovakia, Turkey, and so on. And meanwhile, since 2017, Dr. Natalia has also been the coordinator for the English program in her university. So multiple hats, as I just shared with you, she wears in undertaking several responsibilities while also being in a very good grip of the subject that we are going to discuss. We are delighted to have her today as our main speaker, and then of course we will have later maybe Professor Kruglashow also sharing some of his ideas. With that, let me invite Natalia to make her initial presentation, and in case we have questions and comments later, we'll expect again her to respond to those. Natalia, floor is yours now. You could begin your presentation.
Dear participants of the international webinar, dear colleagues, I am really proud and it's a great honor for me to participate in this scientific event and to share my vision of global challenges to our security. And if you don't mind, I will try to demonstrate my presentation. I hope it will work. Yes. So can you see it? Yes, I think yes.
Yes, we can see it.
So today I would like to talk a little bit about the contemporary challenges towards security. I'm really sorry for my English. English is not my native language, so in some cases I will probably make some mistake, and some titles and names will be not pronounced as it is in reality. So sorry, but I hope that we will understand each other during our conversation. So if you look on our world today, we will see that it is very small and very tender, yes, and it needs to be protected by us in all spheres. So millennia ago, the world seemed extremely large and terrifying for people who lived in those times. But thousands of years passed too, and right now we feel how small and how fragile in our Earth is. So right now I think that everybody understands the necessity to protect our world, our Earth, because our future depends on our world and our Earth, of course, because otherwise we will disappear. So from person to society, from human to humanity, we ask ourselves about what does it mean security, yes, and what does it mean to be secure. And on my point of view, there is a very strong connection between security of person and between security of society and of humanity totally. So for everybody is very important to have some meal, to be environmentally secure, yes, to have a possibility to breathe by fresh air, to have some personal security, of course, some economical issues, financial instruments. And right now we understand how important is the political security and to be secure in political frames, because otherwise all other aspects will be destroyed by external powers and external action. So in this sense, every human needs to be protected by internally and externally. But in another vision, in another dimension, we can state that not only human, but also society had to be fit, had to have a possibility to live in secure environmentally. And of course, every society needs to be protected in political and economical sphere. So the question is, what do we have in 21st century? And I am sure that various factors from personal perception to geographical location play important role in determining priorities. So for somebody, the first place is growing struggle for world dominance. For other people, the main problem is energy challenges, and energy, not only the oil, gas, but also water, food, etc., etc. Wars and regional and local conflicts, pandemic COVID-19, and you can continue this list of different challenges which we have right now. But in general, from the beginning of 20th century or even earlier till nowadays, we have the constant struggle between two systems of values and two political systems, democracy and totalitarianism. And for my personal opinion, everything what is now happening is related to that. So I'll try to illustrate this my point in my next slides and in my next conversations. Of course, my nationality and my geopolitical identity plays an important role in my worldview. And for me, crucial changes has been started from 1991 when the Soviet Union and Soviet system collapsed. But for every region, there is its own starting point of radical changes. For Ukraine, it's, for example, August 24, 1991, when we proclaimed our independence. And as far as I know, for India, for example, it's August 15, 1947. So that was the new starting point for independent India and for development of the state. So if we return back to probably my vision, yes, and my vision of this future events, the specific feature of the USSR collapse was the huge influence on the system of international relations and the crossroads for big international actors after 1991. So what we had after 1991 in Euro-Asian probably or global vision and dimension, we had before that this bipolar system when we had two big international actors like the USA and the Soviet Union or the USSR, and they tried to dominate all over the world, and they in some senses divided their spheres of influence, but of course they had some critical points and some critical issues which are right now history, and that's another topic for another conversation. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union and socialistic system, we had another question had arisen, that was like, what would be the world after that? Would be 15 new players and new balance of power in Europe and all over the world? Would Russia play the huge role and will be like the next state after the Soviet Union? Will be both unipolar or multipolar? Nobody knew about that in 1991. And as far as we remember, and we can find it in different topics, in different papers, monographs, etc., that people were talking a lot about the possibility of future development of world international system. Of course, there were some questions about the place and role of new independent states in such international organization as, for example, United Nations organization. And you remember about the question about the necessity of taking part in it after the disappearance of the Soviet Union. So Russian Federation became the next state after the Soviet Union. Ukraine was lucky we were the member of this organization when it was organized, so we had no such problem, so I will not stop on it. But right now, we have another situation. And right now, as for me, we have this question about the continuity, transformation, or change in international relations and international system of international relations. So as far as we can see, or as far as we can think about it, that contemporary or existing system of international relations has revealed its own imperfections, and it has become clear that changes are inevitable. So we have traditional players like the USA. Nothing has been changed in the political system of the United States of America, and of course it played and still is trying to play a huge role in international relations. We have Russian Federation, which tries to become so huge as the Soviet Union was, or even like to combine the Soviet Union and Russian Empire in one state right now. And this nostalgia, which was Professor Kurglashov talking about in previous webinar, you can develop these ideas. And also we have such power as China, which is trying to play the global role, and it has its own strategic of development of the state, and economy plays a really huge role in this strategy. So this, like, not all players, but these are those on which I would like to stop in today. Nowadays, Prime Minister of Great Britain, Boris Johnson, told that the security of every nation depends on the essential principle that countries should not change borders or acquire territory by force. He told it when he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but I am sure that this thesis is actual right now for all participants and for all players and for all states, especially today, when different states are trying to make some revision on nowadays borders between states, and they're trying to make some even sometimes small or bigger changes in it. So after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we had the situation in Europe when NATO as the defense alliance got the possibility to share its influence far from its traditional or before that borders and territory of influence. And a number of post-socialistic states tried and started to this inclusion process to NATO because they wanted to feel themselves more secure from the former Soviet system and from Russian Federation, and they wanted to become the real members of a new society and new democratic world. So here you can see this new borders of NATO and these new states which entered also after 1991. But also we can state that NATO and its widening or enlargement became the formal pretext for new unions. And in 2022, right now, at the beginning of February 2022, we've seen the start of new, probably powerful, we don't know the future about this union of Russia and China. So on February 4, 2022, as far as all of us know, there was the meeting between leaders of Russian Federation and China, and they announced the concern about the enlargement of NATO and about these virtual threats which are existing on their point of view to their security and to security to the world. So, but if you look back to the history of the Russian-Chinese friendship, which is right now looks like very close and very actual and beneficial for both sides, we can see that it has been good start probably in 2014 when Russian Federation started its war against Ukraine. And here you can see this map when we can find this situation of Russia and of its enlargement, its attempt to invade Ukraine and to take some territories. As far as you remember, in 2014, the part of Ukrainian territory like Crimea was annexed by Russian Federation, and we also lost control on some of our eastern border territories. And here you can see some probably diagram or something like this about this steps toward closer ties with China, and we can see that nostalgia for imperial past from Russian Federation, yes, probably provoked, but probably became more visible in this war with Ukraine, which has been started openly in 2014. And after that, the United States of America, the European Union, and a number of different states all over the world proclaimed some sanctions toward Russian elite, toward Russian politicians, and toward Russian Federation. So after that, Russia announced about the movement to Asia and about its necessity to make closer ties with China. After that, the new discussions and new negotiations about the closer ties, especially in trades between Russian Federation and China, has been started. And there were given a number of Chinese investitions to the mining resources and especially in oil and gas sector from China from 2014. So we can see that Russia lost in European market, but it tried to make some benefits from China from 2014. And here we can see that this movement to the global leadership of Russia and China has some common features. So first of all, we can talk about some regional instability, and we will talk a little bit later about that, about wars and military conflicts, and some similar features between China and Russia, and probably between India and Ukraine. And also we can see that both China and Russia tried to spread their power and to become the leading actor in world international system using different tools like economy. For example, in 2017, on December 9th, Sri Lanka formally leased a 90-year lease to China on the deep water port of Hambantota on its southern coast. So it can lead in some changes in balance of power in India Sea, but also it demonstrates the strong power, economic power of China, which is using for achieving some political goals. And also we know about this energy dependence of the European Union states and a number of states in Central and Eastern Europe, for example, from Russian Federation, and this energy tool for political dominance and for political influence of Russian Federation. So in this sense, we have some question about the probably new balance of power in the world and about the tendencies to make some changes in world order and in the world rule, which is trying to be done by Russia and China. Both of them have common aim to become leading actors from one point of view, to take out from the international scene the United States of America as the great power, and of course to influence all over the world. So if you look about this first point, which I was reading about the regional instability, wars and military conflicts, just to remind that Russian military activity for last decade was really very, very active. Here you can see some pictures on 4 conflicts which took part from the end of 1990s. So that's Moldova and Transnistria, which is till now is under the pressure of Russian Federation. That's 2008. That's Georgia and Abkhazia and South Ossetia. That's another point. And also you can see the map of Ukraine in 2014, the annexation of Crimea and the invading of Russian Federation, or attempt to invade eastern part of Ukraine and making proclaiming some People's Republic and trying to make some influence on Ukraine via military actions. And also you can see this map with the green color of Russian Federation and its activity in Syria in 2015, and some lessons of military activity of Russian Federation were learned by Russian military servants, and they're trying to upgrade it in Ukraine right now. So we have very complicated situation with Russian military activity and Russian military attempts to dominate all over the world. I can't stop about this China military activity because it's not so active and openly active. But I just want to demonstrate these two maps, like 2014 again, 2022 right now in Ukraine, and Russian activity several days ago, yes. And also I think that this map, China-India or Sina-India borders is more familiar to you, because I'm just a little bit familiar on the situation that took place on May 2020 on Chinese-India border. And as far as I know and as far as I understand, the conflict is stalemate. So it is unsolved till now, and I think it needs some additional efforts. But it demonstrates that both these states have really aggressive model of behavior, political behavior, and they try to make some dominance in different spheres. So one of the challenge in this sense, from my point of view, and I just want you to think about it, is the interdependence of world politics. So right now we have probably to think about the fact that if we support one actor by our actions, or if we are neutral toward one actor, we support another one. So if we support authoritarian regime in one state, we support the same in all others by silence. So we probably don't announce that, but we are supporting it. So by supporting Russia in Ukraine, we support, for example, China in Tibet. Yes, so that's probably not the same, but that's a question. And I think that you know, and you are thinking about the possibility of growing activity or possible activity of China, for example, in Taiwan. And that's also another point of view, another question for political observers, politicians, experts, etc. And we will not stop on it right now. But I think that we have to think about this. So we have to think that every action in contemporary world leads to some consequences. We can't predict all of them, but we can think about the possible consequences in different ways. So probably, or anyway, we can think that supporting one can lead to supporting another, and it can lead to upgrading the existing system of international relations. And that's the challenge right now. And we can see what is happening, for example, in the European Union towards this energy dependence from Russian Federation, and to support towards the sanctions, political behavior, elections, etc. And that will be very good illustration about this interdependence of world politics right now. Also, another challenge for me personally, and I'm not sure not only for me, and I'm sure that you were thinking a lot about that, is terrorism. So everybody remembers about the terrorist attack on September 11, 2001, and we know that the further development of situation was really complicated. And all of us know that victims of terrorist attack provided this class action to Saudi Arabia because of this terroristic act. And right now we have not only one, but a huge number of different the same terroristic act, not by airplane like it was in the United States, but in another vision in Ukraine. And also we can think about that was the attack of one terroristic organization, but the class action was towards the whole state. But right now we have a number of terroristic actions of the state, and right now, I think it's time to think about the possible consequences and possible actions to provide or to push it for responsibility for what it is done by Russian Federation in Ukraine. Here is the picture of Mariupol right now in 2022, in March 2022, and you can see that the city is totally destroyed. That's the only one part, but that's really very, very painful for all of us. And of course, you can say me that, okay, right now, the same, you see the situation in Ukraine, yes, and it's painful for you because you are Ukrainian, and you're right, it's very painful for me. But the same was in Syria, and Russian Federation bombed Aleppo in 2015. And also that was another dimension of this problem, I think. And I think that it's time to think about the vision of terrorism and about the responsibility for terroristic attack and for terrorism in the world right now. So that's another challenge, and it's time to probably a little bit change the attitude toward it. And the next challenge, which is very important and which is connected with the previous one, is disinformation and political propaganda. To be honest, psychological war was and still is one of the main points during all wars, but as British researcher Paul Leinberg told, during the First World War. And First World War was the first one where a new weapon, new rules, and new models of political and military behavior was used. So psychological war, this influence to our consciousness, this influence for our political behavior, for our support of one or another side, was systematically started to use during the First World War. We will not talk a lot about the history of 20th century, but you know that the whole 20th century could be called as a century of propaganda. So from the First World War, via the totalitarian practice in Nazi Germany and Stalin's USSR, we can talk that propaganda became the real part of the life of at least two huge societies, German and Soviet. And this propaganda was used a lot during the Second World War and, of course, after the Second World War. It was used both by totalitarian and by democratic regimes, but it was really important for all parts and for all sides to influence on people and to include people, involve people in their system of values, either totalitarian or authoritarian or democratic one. And effectiveness of political propaganda was... I'm sorry, somebody is trying to speak.
Khushbu, please mute yourself. Okay, ma'am, please continue.
Yeah. Okay. So if we are talking about the effectiveness of political propaganda, we can state that it measures by the possibilities to achieve political goals. So if society agrees to some political behavior and behave as them in the same way as the subject of political propaganda wants, this propaganda is effective one. So we will talk about it, but I just want to also to tell about another point or another risks of political propaganda. So we can see that individual is very weak in some senses to struggle against political propaganda. But in some senses, when individual has critical thinking and critical approach towards the political reality, it's okay because he or she can make some wall of defendants and became more secure in this sense. But collective and state also are dependent on political propaganda at all, especially in 21st century. So to make some conclusion on political propaganda, we can talk that this is an information or ideas which are spread by an organized group or government to influence people's opinions, especially by not giving all facts or by secretly emphasizing only the one way of looking at the facts. So this one is really very, very important for understanding the role of political propaganda. I know that every society has its own experience of political propaganda. We in Ukraine have one. The societies in Europe or European societies, German, British, Slovak, etc., have another experience, and also some other nations in all over the world have their own experience of political propaganda and influencing on our consciousness. So that's really very important for all of us. But also in 21st century, especially after 2014, information started to use to disorganize governance, to organize anti-government protests, to dilute adversaries, influence public opinion, and reduce opponents all over the world. Again, it was used before. It was done by different governments in different points and in different states all over the world in 20th century and even before this. But at the beginning of 21st century, it has been started to use in systematic way. So it became the systematic practice of using information to influence on the strategy of national or state development. And here you can see the example, which is really actual for me as a representative of Ukraine, concerning the Russian dimensions of propaganda, because from 2014, Russia became very high-level activity in this direction. So we can see the first very effective example of political propaganda in Crimea in 2014, before so-called referendum, where people of Crimea formally announced their willingness to become the part of the Russia. So we can state that it worked, yes, not totally, not for everybody, because a huge number of people went out of Crimea, a huge number of people didn't participate in referendum. A huge number of people were against it, but it was counted as it was necessary by Russian government. But this propaganda was open, was very aggressive, and was used on all levels, from individual to society, for Ukrainian group, for Ukrainian society, for Russian society, because they had to accept Crimea, and also for the international society, because international society had to also accept these changes of borders. The next point was Catalonia in Spain, and also Scotland in Britain. So these two referendums, which took place in 2015 and 2017. And again, we've seen, and it was fixed, this activity of Russian propaganda and Russian disinformation tools and ways of influence on Spanish and British society. So also that was very important. And right now in Ukraine, especially from autumn, especially 2022, and especially in February, and right now in Ukraine and all over Ukraine and concerning Ukraine, we can see a huge rainstorm, is it correct? Yes, of Russian propaganda about what is happening in Ukraine, what is Ukraine, what is the mission of Russian government, etc., etc. And here you can see the person of Lavrov, who is talking about that in Bucha, that Russian people has no any did nothing in Bucha, and that's like this huge lie, but it is spread by Russian government and Russian people. And another point, which is also dualistic attitude toward contemporary challenges to our security, is combination of physical threats and mental threats. So we had from 2019 till today, yes, this pandemic of COVID-19. And again, that was the challenge for every person, and this was a challenge for societies, for national states, and for the whole world, because nobody knew in 2020, in February, for example, 2020, what to do with this new virus, yes, how to deal with it, and what humanity can do in this sense. So nobody knew about that, and we've seen this closing borders, this virtualization of our life. And to be honest, this virtualization, which became the fundamental basis of contemporary life, was used a lot for spreading new disinformation, new fake news concerning pandemic, and changing our attitude toward information, misinformation, disinformation, and toward our perception of the world. So right now, to be honest, we live at least in two realities. So in reality, where we can talk with each other, where we can see our reactions, where we can touch each other, communicate, share some ideas, etc., etc. And we also live in some virtual world, which probably can be divided at least into parts, yes? This virtual reality, which is more or less closer to our physical reality, yes? And this virtual reality, which is producing by propaganda and disinformation. And COVID-19 opened a new epoch, probably, in this virtualization of misinformation and disinformation. So from 2022, the European Union and the Council of Europe is talking about the infodemia. So this not only pandemia of COVID, but also this pandemia of misinformation and disinformation. And that is also very important and very painful for everybody, because it's about every person's life, yes? It's about my personal security, my children, my family, your personal security, your society, your work, your rest, etc., etc. So also this was used. I know about this Russian Federation fakes, which was spread in Ukraine, for example, and in the European Union. You know about another fakes which were produced from another sources, but we see that, and that was very important. And one of the main questions which was brought, for example, in our area, in our geographic area, was about the resistance and about the effectiveness of different political regimes. So for me personally, from 2020 till today, I am finding some information, some articles, some research on the effectiveness of democratic regimes and authoritarian regimes in their struggle with pandemic. And for example, many Russian authors are providing the idea that authoritarian regimes are more effective in this struggle with pandemic. And they make the example of China, which is one of the most successful states in this sphere. And that is very interesting, because we can talk about this vaccination process, we can talk about the sale of, for example, Sputnik vaccine and a number of different fake news, but also we can talk about this question about what is democracy, how effective is democracy in securing concrete person, concrete human, society, and is it possible to make secure world in a democratic way of thinking? So nowadays, I just want to conclude probably with the same thesis which I was starting, that I think that the main threat and the main challenge for all of us is the struggle between democracy and authoritarianism or totalitarianism, because it's really very important. We are struggle for our future. We are struggle for our children, for their way of living, because we know that some totalitarian practices can be effective in a very short term. Yes, we have some examples, but in strategic development, they are useless, and democracy, you know, that is the basis for our life. So thank you very much. Thank you for your possibility to share some ideas.
Thank you, Natalia. That was one of the most comprehensive and very thorough presentations that I heard on Ukraine crisis so far. I was particularly impressed with so much of visuals, graphs and maps, and that I think made the impact of the argument that Natalia was making very, very effective. She highlighted how supporting Russia in Ukraine for India could also mean encouraging China in doing similar things to its neighboring countries. And she showed a map and mentioned India also. I think she made a very interesting comparison of authoritarian systems versus democratic systems, where she brought in this whole debate, almost a century-long debate about use of propaganda. And I was very impressed with that kind of very thorough academic presentation that Natalia made. Thank you so much. I'm sure you worked really hard to create this very interesting PowerPoint, and all of the students, I think, must have very clearly benefited from such a teacher-like explanation of what the situation is and what are its implications, and not just for Ukraine, but also for the rest of the world. In that sense, you even talked of the global impact that it could potentially have. I'm now going to request our other senior colleague, Professor Anatoly Krugashov, who's with us. He's an eminent and very well-known political scientist and historian. He currently heads the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at the National University in Ukraine. But he's also the director of the Research Institute for European Integration and Regional Studies. Now that makes it very relevant because we are today debating issues of European integration. His research interests, of course, have been for a long time European integration, as I just mentioned, post-Soviet political developments, political regionalism, ethno-nationalism, and political history. Professor Krugashov has also served as visiting professor to several universities in many countries, including, for example, in University of Alberta in Canada. He's served in another university in Poland. He's also served as visiting professor to European Humanities University in Lithuania. So with extremely wide experience, but very clearly defined focus on issues of regional integration, particularly when it comes to Europe, which is currently under certain stress, and therefore Ukrainian crisis has implications for European integration as well, and of course, as Natalia said, even beyond. So with that initial introduction to my very dear friend Anatoly, let me invite him to make his remarks as well. Floor is yours, sure. Professor Krugashov.
Thank you very much. I will try to be as brief as possible, but in the same time, I thank you very much, Professor Francich. You made a very bright introduction for me. So listening to you, I imagine me myself a great person, but I have to be much more modest with regard to my records, but still I have to work more to get them growing up. Thank you very much for this appreciation and support. First of all, let me share with you that Natalia is not just my colleague, she's more than a colleague for me because she's my former student and now we are working together in the same department. I know her from the beginning of 90s, as the student of our faculty. So far for me, it's a very pleasure and honor to be in this event where she made her prime, introduction as a invited speaker for the respected audience of our Indian colleagues, because India for us is a legendary country we like so much. As historians, we learned a lot about the Indian history and culture, and we are very impressive, including the origin of our own culture with the Indian heritage. So that is why. First of all, then, I'm really impressed with her very wide scope of the challenges and threats she undertook to gather together and to present in certain order what is threatening our world and how to maintain our world more orderate and more resilient towards these threats and challenges. I do agree. She schematized the idea that we moved from the bipolar world to the multipolar, and now we don't know where we are moving to. In my opinion, we are again back to the very pre-modern situation with this Hobbesian order, where the war of each against other. This is the most probable situation with our world when the international law is not effective, as is previously, to an extent, with many exceptions earlier. The United Nations and other international organizations couldn't cope with these threats and demands duly, because we see that it's a very weird situation when the Security Council could not resolve this issue, for instance, with the Russian-Ukrainian war, because Russia is both the aggressor and at the same time the permanent member of Security Council. So that is another story, by the way, for international political scientists, that why Russia occupied the role of USSR as a founding member and plus as a permanent member of Security Council, because it's not so obvious. We had 15 member states, 15 union republics, but it is a privilege of Russia to be the, so to say, successor of the USSR placement in the framework of United Nations. Then she also spoke about the propaganda and other tools, and about this Russian-Chinese alliance, which is threatening not only for the world order, but for India itself, I guess so. But in this respect, she spoke professionally, because it is her studies field about the communication, about propaganda, psychological war, but she didn't mention, for instance, such a threatful and dreadful tools of undermining the international order as a corruption. Because countries like Russia and to extent China, and not only, they widely explore corruption. And for instance, for me, look, for instance, former German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, he preferred to be the appointee of Putin regime with regard to Putin Gazprom. And look, for now, Schröder again launched an advocacy company in favor of Russia in Germany and in the EU. So let me say that that was a very my personal touchy point. When I visited the United States 2006, and made around trip around, likewise, Columbia University, Brown University, for sure Harvard University, with some lectures, and then I concluded with a small partner university of us, Lock Haven University of Pennsylvania. They invited me there to speak about the Ukraine framework of European integration and other things. And finally, they asked me about then time, the most urgent scandalic issue about Schröder acceptance of Putin moves. I concluded replying with that with a very short sentence. So if the case of Gerhard Schröder is not a corruption, so corruption does not exist at all. So this is a very problem, but I really share Natalia's opinions about the interlinks or interrelations, interdependency on a political regime character and the behavior of political actors, geopolitical behavior including, and therefore the consequences of the authoritarianism, different types, by the way, and just in Russia we can witness the neo-totalitarian traits in Russian political regime. So this is a very fundamental methodological tool to apply to the understanding of the character of the international relations and their current developments and further prospects. And finally, I would like to conclude in the audience, honorable audience of my colleagues and political scientists, that really these changes since Russian-Georgian war, annexation of Crimea, the murderment of Syrians by Russia not only, and so on, so then threats of China to Taiwan and not only, so we can to go on with the samples. So all of them requested of us to reconsider theoretical background and approaches we apply to the studying and learning international relations and political science. We have to be really more careful, more wise, more responsible when applying any concept. And finally, the final word. Natalia told about the Russian turn towards Asian dimension of its foreign policy, including Russia-Chinese alliances, or the emerging alliance. I would say that it's not a novelty. As a historian and as a political scientist, my main profile, by the way, when I concluded my dissertation on doctor of science at Dr. Habil, second doctorate. So I discussed and I learned Russian political thought very many times, for decades, Russian political thought. So this turn happened after the October Revolution, when the Bolsheviks came to power, and in the immigration, Russian immigrants evolved a very interesting concept of Euro-Asianism, where they pretended to be a core of Eurasia. And recently, I mean, after the breakdown of USSR, Dugin and others, they converted this classical Euro-Asianism in new Euro-Asianism. And it is a real ideological, conceptual, and methodological foundation for Russian foreign policy, paving a way towards closer China-Russia alliances. So, but indeed, I would like to conclude, not to make a counter-report, counter-presentation for Natalia's speech, that it is very bright, very deep, thoughtful, and useful observation and consideration of what is going on with our world and what should be done with us as political experts and analysts with the changes we are facing with. Thank you very much, Natalia, for your bright presentation. Thank you very much, Professor Swaran Singh, for the possibility to share my opinion. And thank you very much for all the honorable audience for your real attention and support towards our search for better, secure, and peaceful world.
Thank you, Professor Kruglasov. I can fully appreciate the pride that you as a mentor and as a teacher have in seeing Natalia making such an intense and detailed presentation. That is a matter of pride for you as a teacher, that you have mentored a very, very brilliant scholar. And we are lucky to have her speak to us. And I noticed that Natalia very carefully had calibrated her presentation to engage India and engage Indian audience as to what are the issues that would connect Ukrainian crisis right now to what it means for an Indian person, Indian scholar, or young Indian students. I appreciate that you made mention of corruption, which of course can be called a twin brother or twin sister of a propaganda machine, which gets well oiled with the lure or attraction of corrupt practices of all kinds. At some stage, I'm sure Natalia will have some response to that, but let's open it now. If any of the students, as I mentioned, or any faculty members wish to either make a comment or ask a question, I'm requesting them to please switch on your video so that the speaker, and you can ask both the speakers. Speakers can see you and hear you directly as to what are you saying or what is the question you have. And then they can respond to you, at least having some kind of face-to-face interaction with anyone who's willing to engage in either dialogue in terms of making comment or asking a question. So who would like to go first?
Some question in the chat box. Yes.
Chat box is here. There is somebody called Samindra Mohan Bishwas. Is Samindra Mohan Bishwas with us? I see him. Yes, please, Samindra, go ahead and ask your question. Or Pravir Kanti, if he's here with us. Sometimes people write their question and they are no longer with us. Is Dr. Pravir Kanti still with us? Or Samindra is... Samindra, please go ahead.
This Samindra won't be me speaking. Can I?
Yes, speak. Samindra, please
Okay,
speak.
thank you, sir. My first question is that how this. Can you hear me? Good evening, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, please ask your question, Dr.
Hello.
Biswas.
Hello.
Dr. Biswas, please speak.
Hello. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Bolo, bhai, bolo.
No, I want to know whether I am audible or not. That's the main problem.
Yes, you are. If you are able to see me, I am even making gesture that you are audible. Okay, I think there is some communication issue. Kushal, you have any question?
Samindra sir, you are very much audible. Samindra sir, you are very much audible. Please go ahead with your question.
Hello.
He is not listening to us, so let's not continue with that.
Actually, I want to put a question that how the ongoing conflict will affect the humanity, the future generation, the human security of the world. And secondly, how the world will look at the new political situation, the changing political order that is sitting right now. So these are my two questions.
Very good, very good. I'm sure we got your question. Natalia has received your question. Impact on human security and impact on the global or world order. Natalia, would you like to say something in response?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. And I just want to
Praveer, please mute yourself. Dr. Praveer Kanti, please mute yourself, or the host can mute everybody. Who's the host?
Okay. So I just want to clarify, do you mean this conflict, Russian-Ukrainian war? Did I understand you correctly, Dr.
Yes.
Samindra? Yes. So on my point of view, it is affecting humanity right now. And we are right now accepting the new reality, new dimensions of security. We are changing our attitude to personal and collective security. We understand that contemporary wars are completely another than the wars which were 100 years ago. And right now, nobody in any dot of the world can feel himself or herself secure with modern armament. So that's the one point. The another is that the historical probably overview or several historical remarks. So firstly, we've changed, or the world changed its attitude towards security after the First World War. So as far as everybody remember from the history, after the First World War, big players understood that something has to be done to prevent any same or similar conflicts in future. And as far as you remember, the new international organization like League of Nations was organized, was managed to protect world from any similar conflicts at all. And as far as all of us know, it was impossible to prevent the Second World War because of not idealistic management of these organizations. So League of Nations had a lot of different tools, a lot of different possibilities. It opened a number of very well or very high level directions of managing peace, etc., etc. But anyway, we had the Second World War. So it has to be replaced, and it was replaced by the United Nations. And as far as all of us know, at the end of beginning of 21st century, a number of different discussions about the role of the United Nations organization, about of Council of Security of United Nations organizations, about the right of veto of big actors was arose. So a number of states was talking about the непонятности. Professor Krug, Yes, unacceptability of this model when just several actors have a right to put veto, and all others just the viewers of this political order. But there were not any real facts and real pushes to change the situation. Today we have this situation when Russian Federation invades Ukraine, and it is still the member of Council of Security Council of United Nations, and it still has the right of veto. So that's the questions what to do and how to deal. So the member state of the organization which has to prevent any conflicts is the active member or active side of the conflict, of the war. So I'm sure that we have to change the situation, and I'm sure that either the United Nations will be changed, the mechanism of preventing war and this interaction between different players, or it would be replaced at all, and it would be put a new organization, world organization, which will be trying to prevent any conflict. Because it is unacceptable when some states like, I'm sorry if I'm not right, but like Russia or China has a right to choose the way of my future. I don't want to live in China or in Russia, and I want my state, India, Canada, and some other states to choose their right for the future. And United Nations organization have to present all of us and have to make our lives secure. So I think that experts, politicians, practitioners has to deal with it, and I think that they are started to work right now, and I'm sure that soon it will be changed.
Thank you, Natalia. There is another question in the text box from one of our colleagues from the college. Pravir Kanti is asking you the changing dimensions of democracy, where we are seeing ethnic democracy, militant democracy, authoritarian democracy, autocratic democracy, majoritarianism. What all this means to the understanding of security perceptions. What kind of world are we imagining where democracy is taking very different shapes and sizes? Otherwise, we were all believing democracy is a good form of government, but now democracy is showing many different forms around the world. What that means to the security perceptions?
That's a very complicated question, really. And I wanted to put in my presentation one more issue, but I stopped myself because it's very wide and it could be developed by all of participants of this event. This national identity and political identity and citizen identity as the challenge of contemporary world and as a challenge to the security or the possibility to build the secure world. So that's the question probably for discussion with our students, yes, because they have this completely fresh view on the national identity and on identity problems. But right now we have this globalized world, and we have to accept the idea of this eclectic democracy, if it's possible to tell so. It couldn't be national, it couldn't be ethnic, it couldn't be like militant, etc., etc. We have to understand that in global world, one world is so small and it depends on every person. We have to understand that every side, every drop is valuable. So the ethnic identity is very important personally for every man and for the world, because we see trees, different trees, sky, clouds, sun, stars, etc., and everything is making our world bright and very interesting. And in this sense, every nationality, every ethnic vision, every ethnic identity is valuable. Right now, we have different states and we have different approaches to manage our states, but they are based on historical traditions, on our cultural differences, etc., etc. And of course, I can't come to another stage and say that my vision of democracy is the best, because even in ancient Greek, we see that there were different attitudes toward democracy, and it wasn't so huge as the vote. Ancient Greece made the best present for ourselves. Yes, they presented us the democracy as the idea and ideology. And in this sense, I think that this tolerance and acceptance of different visions and counting every person and every society is the basis for our secure world. Otherwise, we will still have some struggles because we can't give somebody to one state, to one person, the rule and the right to manage the whole world.
Thank you. Let me go to Professor Kruglasov. Would you like to add something to what is the impact on human security discourse or the impact of multiple kinds of democracies that we are seeing?
Well, thank you very much.
What it means?
It's a really important issue. And I do agree with Natalia Nechaeva-Ilichuk with her perception that we should not share receipts of democracy and security for anybody, because we are not in the global pharmacy to heal all the illness. For sure, she's right that every country can choose experiments and to make better their own political regime, I mean, in democratic countries. So here is not mentioned the problem for the EU countries, by the way, the problem of so-called illiberal democracy, which is emphasized with Viktor Orban government in Hungary. And to an extent, it covers also, to a less extent, much less extent, a Polish ruling party, Order and Justice, Порядок и справедливость. Well, it doesn't matter with translation. So I don't think that we have the only way towards democracy, but some basic standards which make different democratic and undemocratic, totalitarian, authoritarian, whatever regimes are quite clear. And when we are going to direct link what is the ideal regime, I just came back to the Plato ideals of the, the best state, yeah. And that was the beginning of utopian genre in political philosophy, yeah. And we know that this ideal state elaborated with Plato is hardly ideal. So far, we should not speak about the ideal type of democracy, of democratic regime. We should have to speak about the real approaches of the democratic states towards resolving the current issues of global, regional, and national order. And finally, because the Prabir countries started from the question of the nation state is changing, I do agree, it's absolutely clear that nation change is changing, that the nation state is very debatable for now, notion, concept, and so on. But in the same time, when we look at the global trends, we can observe that the nation states rather appeared, they are going to be more and more on the global scene, and therefore this shape of our political community is inevitable for us. So we have rather discussed about the content of the nation states and their cooperation, which is other. And in this respect, for sure, all of these democratic forms are meaningful, very, very meaningful. But meaningless is to discuss which are the best. I do agree with Natalia in this her assumption. Thank you very much.
Thank you. In fact, it is interesting. Today is also the inauguration of the 7th year or 7th edition of what we call a Raisina dialogue in New Delhi that focuses on geopolitics and geoeconomics. And we have about 7 countries from Europe represented by their foreign ministers. These include Poland, Lithuania, Slovenia, Portugal, the Netherlands, Norway, Luxembourg, and of course, the chief guest of this inaugural session was the President of European Commission, Dr. Ursula von der von der Leyen, and she, in her inaugural address today, had mentioned about her visit to Bucha and the kind of destruction that she has herself witnessed in outskirts of Kiev. And she highlighted that in her speech, saying that the whole world need to come together to deal with this conflict going on now, entering the third month. So my question to both Natalia and Professor Kruglashow would be, what is your assessment of European response? After all, Ukraine is seen as one of the, in fact, the most important European country in many ways. But what is, you think, the response of European states in your own assessment? So I'll start with Natalia, and then I'll ask Professor Kruglashow to answer. Natalia, you could go first.
Thank you. May I clarify, because I'm not sure if I understand correctly, my English is really not perfect. You mean the possibility for Ukraine to become the member of the European Union, or?
No, I mean, how has the European nations behaved in responding to the crisis in Ukraine that Ukraine is now?
Okay, thank you very much. Really. Okay. It would be the same if I ask you how our European states behave in some cases which is occurring in India, for example, yes, or in some other states, because there is no the only one position of European states. So we have the European Union as an international institution, and they're trying to make the common politics towards some basic issues, and they are supporting Ukraine in our struggle against occupation, yes, against invasion, but they focused mainly on humanitarian aspects, and it's virtual, and that's normal, and that's objective. But also we see the reaction of different societies, national societies and national states in the European Union, and they are trying to make their own decision in this way. So I just want to clarify that the European Union is mainly economic and political union. So what we want from the European Union and what it can do for Ukraine, it's a little bit different positions. Of course, I as a Ukrainian want to be protected. And I want the European Union, the NATO, and all over the world to protect Ukraine. That's my main issue, my main idea, etc., etc. But European Union has no own armed forces, has no any Ministry of Defense, etc., etc. So they can't help us institutionally in military aspects. They can give us some financial, economical, humanitarian, and other aid and support, and they are doing it. They are supporting us politically, and they are provided more sanctions against Russian Federation. They are trying to deal with this energy dependence from the Russian Federation, and the number of European states stopped or trying to stop this dependence from Russian Federation. They are trying to search some alternative resources for energy. So that's very great for us, because we hope and we know that influenced on Russia in strategic perspective. But every nation depends. Yes, we had elections in France this Sunday, and we have results. And of course, it's not the best. But from Le Pen and Macron, of course, Macron is much better for Ukraine. So it's undiscussable. So it's okay for us. So I think that European Union tries to do its best, really. And they're trying to keep balance of power. And right now they understand that if they don't stop Russia in Ukraine, it will spread all over the Europe. And if they will spread all over, it will spread all over the Europe. It will be really global third world war, and all states all over the world will be involved in it. So nobody need it. And the European Union understands it as both as institution and every national state. So they are trying to do. And I appreciate them for their efforts and for all that they are doing for Ukraine right now. And I appreciate to all European states which are at the same time the members of NATO who are trying to support us military, because it's really very important for Ukraine, this military defense, because the European Union is under the military defense of NATO, and states, members of NATO are trying also more or less to support. But of course I want more, to be honest. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me invite Professor Kruglasov to add something more on it.
Thank you very much, Professor Singh, for your kind invitation. Natalia really covered a lot of issues. But first of all, we have to distinguish that the EU itself is not well integrated with regard to security policy. Maybe this foreign policy a bit better, but not with regard to security policy. And Lisbon Treaty didn't make European Union from that point of view stronger. By the way, Natalia Nechayeva-Yurichuk mentioned the name of Macron, who won this second in his life presidential election. It's good, really, it's good because we had no other options. We are not voters in France, by the way, but still, it's just from the Ukrainian point of view. But Macron was one who several years ago proposed for the EU to be much stronger, more federalized, and including the Union Army for the EU. But you know that these ideas of Macron weren't shared with the major part of European countries' leaders. So far from now, European Union remained very diverse in opinions how to deal with major global and regional issues, including the Russian war in Ukraine. And we have different countries with the stance towards Russia, Ukraine, European order, global security. I mentioned here the Hungary case, which is proverbial for us because Hungary very many times repeatedly denied any request of Ukraine to support, even with the very simple idea to transport the closest way the weaponry from the EU countries and NATO countries towards Ukraine. And very many times then the request of Ukraine to support a bit our army with some armaments of Hungarian army, which are, I would say, compatible with our militant forces, our armed forces. But again, Budapest denied this request as well. So we have a very interesting move from some the EU countries, like by Sweden and Finland. You know that Finnish parliament voted in favor of joining NATO. Finland, which was a kind of model of neutrality for the European countries, decided to move towards NATO from the EU very, approximately weak umbrella of security. And that is very, very important because in Putin's mind and propaganda of Kremlin, it is a picture that NATO enlarges and it threatens Russia. But in fact, Russian military blatant actions in Moldova, in Georgia, and in Ukraine, all of that made European countries worried about their security because Russian officials several times, including newly deceased Vladimir Zhirinovsky, I would say Vladimir Zhirinovsky, a former deputy speaker of Russian parliament, lower chamber, Duma. So he several times threatened European countries. By the way, let me recall, I named Vladimir Zhirinovsky as a dirty mouth of Putin. Dirty mouth of Putin. And that is true his historical role as a jerk of Kremlin. So he died not quite recently. So he even spoke about that we have to clean up our boats in Indian Ocean. You see, what are the ambitions? So far, NATO enlargement is not the reason of Russia to be militant and aggressive. But Russian aggressivity is as a real reason for the EU and NATO countries to be more prepared. And finally, Natalia is very diplomatic. It's a very good trait of her. In this case, especially publicly, it's very good. But in fact, we sure witnessed some disappointment, not only Hungarian case. We have a very strong support from the Baltic states, which worked together with us in USSR. I mean, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. We have a very strong emotional, financial, military support from Poland, we have a lot of troubles with our joint Polish-Ukrainian relations. A lot of troubles, but now Poles are really our brothers and sisters for Ukrainians. But we have at the same time some disappointment with regard to some failed promises from the EU side, including the problem of our aviation, our navy, and so on and so forth. The promises were done to rearmament Ukraine, but they weren't fulfilled. For sure, it's not good. But I hope and I really prize EU for the growing support. And for sure, I wish you to overcome their, so to say, inner quarrels and disagreements with regard to the main goals, purposes, and what they name as usually as a common European values. Now it is a time of testimony for these values to be truly supported and realized in practice. Thank you very much.
We had a young student, Kushal Bhattacharya. He was on screen. I hope he's still with us. Yes, he's there. He has a question. He's asking, how can democratic countries come together to fight against this misinformation campaign of authoritarian states? Is there a way that democracies can find themselves easily working together? Natalia?
Oh, thank you very much for this question. It's really very important for everybody. And for me personally, and from 2015, for example, the European Union, which we are talking about just in previous question from another point of view, has been launched the new initiative, a struggle against disinformation and misinformation, and they launched the new program, activities, studying, etc., etc. But the main thing I am sure is education in different spheres. So that's formal education, which is providing from kindergarten till the university studying and after university studying. It's also informal education or informal education, when we go to some courses, some trainings, some webinars, so when we get some new skills, etc., etc. And first of all, we have to develop this critical thinking skills. So that's the most important. And in this sense, just to develop your question and the ideas which sounds in our previous discussion is that we have to go a little bit out of this European-centric world, if I can tell this, and to understand that world today, I mean myself, first of all, because I am living in this geographical part of the world. That world is not only Europe. World is also Europe, Asia, Africa, South and Northern America, and Australia. So we have to understand that we are all connected with each other, and that's our common home. And in this sense, if we do it and if we interconnect with each other, despite of any borders, and provide some seminars, some webinars, some trainings, some schools, summer schools, spring schools, etc., on development, first of all, critical thinking and media literacy, so we will be armed against this disinformation. And examples which we can provide, for example, from European practice, and Americans from American practice, and you are from your own practice, and all that will be very useful. Similar features of this authoritarian regimes in propaganda, and will help us to provide more effective defense from this propaganda for democratic world. Otherwise, if we will be just separate drops, separate drops, we will be not united. So in this sense, so we have to unite our efforts in this issue. I am sure that we are doing in Ukraine, in India, in Brazil, in all other states, the same skills. But we have to share our experience. And in this sense, we will be more effective.
Thank you. Professor Kruglashov, you would like to add something to that?
Yeah, I would like, because Natalia is absolutely true with regard to what should be done from the side of the democratic or liberal democratic countries to counter the propaganda from some militant authoritarian regimes. You know that what is interesting with the case of Putin, that I repeatedly said for my colleagues that Putin is very bright. I mean, collective Putin, not Putin personally only, that Putin is very bright with looking for the loopholes, weak places, where he could move through into the democratic systems and to undermine them. Likewise, his interference in the election of France, in the election in the United States, and some other countries, nothing to say about the Central Eastern European countries. That is why we are speaking about the certain countermeasures, defensive measures. But the core problem is how we, liberal worlds, or world which belongs to the democratic camp, could influence the authoritarian countries themselves. How we could prevent the growth and the dangerous turns of the domestic and foreign policy into the most threatful and dreadful mode of behavior. That's the problem, because China is an example of how the Chinese regime defend itself from the outer world influence, and then Russia follows up this track, and therefore Russia made a lot of efforts well in advance to Georgian, Ukrainian war and so on, to clean up the civic society, to make all opponents the so-called foreign agents. This is a special label in Russia, to destroy the opposition, including the killing of Boris Nemtsov, the most, I would say, talented oppositional leader, who was the governor of Nizhny Novgorod and grew up to the post of the first deputy prime minister of Russia. I was acquainted with him personally. That is why I just mentioned his name. So all of that is a very problem, that on the one hand, these states are trying to interfere and reach certain records, but on the other hand, we just have to counteract. It's not enough. We have to think about our influence of that societies to make them more resilient towards the authoritarian regime propaganda and system of education. And the second one is the most challenging part of this story, because to defend themselves, I hope that we will find a true way. But to influence these countries and this regime, this is a very challenge, as for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. That is, I think, very clearly visible that Natalia is being very diplomatic in her answers compared to Professor Kruglashov is much more direct and incisive in his response. I'm sure both of them understand the situation equally well. And I'm happy that Professor Kruglashov mentioned the example of Herr Schroeder in terms of Putin's cultivation of various European leaders. Viktor Orban is another example of Hungary. And to some extent, I was very curiously listening to mention of Macron also, the way Kruglashov mentioned. So the cultivation of various European leaders by President Putin over the last 20 years is something extremely interesting that has perhaps allowed him to kind of survive this long. I'm tempted, Natalia, as a friend, to make a counterintuitive remark to what you said in terms of emboldening Russia and implications for China. I see actually the reverse of it. The way Ukraine has stood up to Russia is a lesson to China that it should not be even imagining of using any military means vis-a-vis neighbors. Definitely not big neighbors like India. Ukraine is a case to show that the so-called erstwhile superpower is fighting, entering now third month of that fight, and is not able to achieve. You remember in the very first day, President Putin, and I'm sure you know better than I do, was saying that Ukrainian armed forces should lay down arms and should topple President Zelensky's government. And he had, sort of publicized his draft treaty asking for written assurances from NATO and United States, to now shrinking his war aims so much rapidly, which is downsizing or climbing down, as we say in English. He's no longer talking of toppling the President Zelensky's team. He's now talking of victory in Mariupol, which is a small victory compared to what he started with. So I think, to me, I fully feel pain of suffering that is happening on the ground. But it's an example of how Ukraine has stood up against Russia. And that is the lesson the Chinese should be looking at, and not even imagining any military action against any of the neighbors. Because unlike Russia, the world will much more effectively come together when it comes to China invading any neighboring country. It will be easier for the world to come together when it comes to China as the target country compared to Russia as the target country. And I understand that this is also opening up a lot of other debates of whether it is human security narratives, sovereignty narratives. The very fundamentals of international relations are being debated now, including United Nations Security Council and the veto power that Natalia mentioned. Russia still continues to hold. There are no easy answers. I think people like me and Professor Kuglashaw have spent long years and decades, and we understand that some of these issues may continue until Natalia grows up to become, our age and continue to debate some of these issues even beyond her. But Ukraine, I think this whole episode has given a great push to those debates for redefining, revisiting, reforming several both structural and conceptual issues that undergird our debates so far. I think we have no more question now, so I'll hand it back to the department. Prashant, you can. I'm handing it over back to you. But my personal thanks to both Natalia and Anatoly, and I'm feeling a great honor and pride to be connected with both of you again. And I look forward we'll be able to meet you in India sometime face to face. My best wishes and be safe. Prashant, back to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for making this webinar, this event very enriching and very magnificent. May I now invite our student, Ms. Susma Raut, to kindly deliver a vote of thanks. Susma, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It is my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks to all who have helped us in making this international webinar such a great webinar. At the very outset, we would like to extend our profound thanks and gratitude to our Vice Principal Sir, Dr. Rameskar, the head of the institution, for granting his approval and providing his perennial support and encouragement towards the successful conduct of this webinar. We express our heartiest thanks to Professor Swaran Singh Sir, Professor at the Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, for accepting our invitation and taking out time from his busy schedule to chair his webinar. Sir, your encouraging participation as a chair has transmuted this occasion into a thought-provoking and vibrant academic event. Thank you very much, sir. We extend our heartiest thanks and gratitude to our distinguished speaker, Dr. Natalia Nechaiva Yurichuk, ma'am, Assistant Professor at the Department of Political Science and Public Administration, Yure Fedkovich, Chernovtsi, National University, Ukraine, for accepting our invitation despite her prior academic engagements elsewhere. We also thank you for not only sparing your invaluable time with us, but for illuminating us with your constructive and captivating ideas concerning the assorted aspects of contemporary challenges towards security. Ma'am, we look forward to have many more opportunities to hear your thoughts and ideas. Thank you very much, ma'am. Our sincere and heartiest thanks go to Professor Anatoly Kruglasov, sir, head at the Department of Political Science and Public Administration, Yuri Fedkovich, Chernovitsy, National University, Ukraine, for agreeing to make his august presence with us as a guest of honor. We feel deeply honored with your participation. Sir, we also thank you for your perennial and generous support and guidance in organizing our academic programs. Thank you very much, sir. Now we would like to thanks to the president of our governing body of our institution, Dr. Sudipta Roy, sir, and all the members of the governing body for their constant moral support to our webinar. Our thanks also go to Dr. Subhajit Ghosh, sir, Bursar, and NAC coordinator at our institution, and to Professor Sadhunath Kundu, sir, coordination of the internal Quality Assurance Cell, and Professor Prabir Kanti Basu, sir, Secretary Teachers Council, for their continued moral support. We deeply acknowledge the unwavering support and guidance received from Professor Devdas Desar, head at the Department of Political Science. Thank you very much, sir. We would like to extend our sincere and heartiest thanks to Professor Prasant Kumar Sharma, sir, an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science, for taking up the initiative to organize this webinar. Thank you very much, sir. We would like to thank you, Dr. Abdul Khalik, sir, an assistant professor at the Department of Physics, and all the members of the seminar and webinar committee for providing all the technical assistance required. Our vote of thanks also go to Professor Deptanu Maji, sir, Professor Kamal Rai, sir, and Professor Anandita Mitra, ma'am, all at the Department of Political Science for their continued support in organizing this webinar. We extend our heartiest thanks to all the teaching and non-teaching staff of our institution for their moral support. A special thanks goes to all our friends and students at the Department of Political Science for enthusiastically coordinating and supporting the webinar by showing fervor interest from the very beginning. Last but not the least, our sincere thanks go to all the respected participants present here for their active participation and for making this event a huge success. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you, Susma. I also acknowledge your support in organizing this webinar. Once again, thank you all for your encouraging participation. We are looking forward to see you all once again in our forthcoming programs. Wishing you all the best and have a wonderful time ahead. Thank you very much. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. It's really impressive and important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.